Who decides if someone should get an abortion? In America, more and more, it's politicians and judges. Voters in 7 states tried to put the decision back in the hands of patients and their care providers, but the anti-abortion movement and their Republican allies aren't taking no for an answer. They're using all the powers of government to put in restrictions that most people don't want. And it's not just the same old sneaky tricks in a few states, though that's happening too. If the religious right gets their way, every American, red state or blue state, will live under a constitution that forces women to the brink of death before being able to get an abortion. We'll talk about all that right now on the politics of democracy. Despite the many, many ballot wins to expand access to abortion and the widely reported suffering and death that restrictions have forced women to endure, the extreme, religiously rooted view that all abortion should be outlawed continues to advance. Today, we'll map out how a religious sect and their Republican allies are giving rights to embryos from the very second of conception, ending the mother's rights at that same moment. The logic underneath this view doesn't get enough scrutiny, so let's unpack it. Also, it's not logic in the sense that it relies on evidence. It's much more better described as a belief system. So 1, it's not just that life begins at conception, but embryos and fetuses bear the image of God, and their lives cannot be destroyed without effacing His glory. How do they know? Christian scripture, or more importantly, their interpretation of it. It is authoritative, inerrant, infallible, and sufficient for life. Therefore, the greatest atrocity facing our generation today is the practice of abortion, and it must be eradicated entirely. How to eradicate it? Giving preborn humans equal protection under the law. Sometimes this is called fetal personhood, and it's the idea that the Constitution should be interpreted as granting the same rights to embryos and fetuses that are given to people. So they aren't just swearing off abortion for themselves because of their religious beliefs. No. They say government should recognize their religious beliefs as authoritative and enshrine into law rights that begin at the moment of conception, so that abortion is eradicated. Courts have started implementing this view, starting in, surprise, surprise, Alabama. There, the Supreme Court found that unborn children are children without exception based on developmental stage. In that case, embryos were accidentally destroyed in an in vitro fertilization clinic. The court found that they had the same legal protections as living children, meaning the destruction of the cluster of cells was in the same legal category as the wrongful death of a minor. But these views and the restrictions they lead to are not popularly supported in the US. In fact, despite efforts to suppress pro-abortion access ballot initiatives in 2024, state after state voted for them, including states Donald Trump won. So even Republican-leaning voters want access to reproductive care. But if you can't get the federal Congress to align with your beliefs, what do? You use the presidency, which controls how funding gets allocated and how laws are enforced. And you turn to the courts, who interpret the laws and the Constitution. Let's start with the executive power of presidential pardons. President Trump, in one of his first acts of his second term, pardoned 10 people convicted of violating the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, which is supposed to prevent abortion opponents from harassing, threatening, or obstructing people who are seeking reproductive care. Trump called them peaceful protesters, when in fact one of their leaders, Lauren Handy, coordinated a blockade inside a clinic where they pushed and shoved their way in, injured a nurse, and prevented a patient who was experiencing labor pains from getting care. Okay, so I am not much for salacious details, but this cannot be ignored. When police searched Handy's home after her arrest, they found 5 fetuses in her freezer. Violent obstruction, which is now practically legal, has been a constant challenge for reproductive care providers like Renee Chalien, whose Michigan clinics have faced disruptive armed protesters, threats, and rescues for decades. 7 anti-abortion activists received felony convictions for chaining themselves to the entrances of her clinics in 2020 and 2021. According to court filings, their coordinated campaign of physical obstruction posed a grave and real threat to the health and fertility of people seeking care. And going through all of that, encountering people shouting at them, calling them baby killer, physically blocking them, it all causes patients distress, anger, and most unfairly, guilt. Patients who encounter these hostilities are also more likely to experience depression after procedures. One care provider reports that patients would enter their clinic crying and shaking from fear and anger, upset to the point that they couldn't receive care. And just in case the pardons didn't signal strongly enough that it was open season on women and their care providers, Trump's Attorney General and FBI ended investigations and dropped newer charges against people disrupting care at clinics. The Department of Justice said they'll only pursue cases that are presenting significant aggravating factors, such as death, serious bodily harm, or serious property damage. Death and bodily harm almost seem inevitable at this point. As one of Trump's pardoned activists, Herb Garrity, put it, there's actual lives being saved every minute you are committing the crime. He says he's committed to nonviolent direct action, but also advises protesters, get out there, whether it's outside the clinic or inside, to actually prevent unborn children's lives from being taken. If you buy into the belief system that embryos are babies, how far would you go to save a baby's life? And what would you think of the woman undergoing such a procedure? Introducing the abortion abolitionists, who take this belief system to its inevitable conclusion. If embryos and fetuses are living persons, people who destroy them, both the doctor and the patient, need to be punished. And if the law won't enforce their beliefs, the abolitionists seem poised to do it themselves. When a leading voice in the abortion debate said she feared getting shot by abolitionists, she got called a demon, ungodly, an accessory to murder, and an enemy of God. Some commenters said that women should not have roles outside the home, reflecting a broader uptick in misogynistic rhetoric around abortion that aligns with the religious doctrines motivating many in the abortion abolitionist movement. So guess who those violent comments were directed at? A Democratic lawmaker maybe? Planned Parenthood perhaps? Nope. They were aimed at Kristen Hawkins, president of the anti-abortion group Students for Life. The abolitionists say of people like Hawkins, politics and compromise have corrupted their mission. That's how Dusty Devers, a Republican state senator in Oklahoma, sees it. He's co-sponsoring a bill that would charge patients who receive abortion with homicide. Devers' bill was one of 12 similar bills introduced across the U.S. in 2025. The Georgia version had nearly 24 Republican co-sponsors. Criminalization of care providers who perform abortions under laws which have been in place for a few years now are already causing pain, suffering, trauma, and death. ProPublica reports that since Texas criminalized abortions in 2022, blood transfusions during emergency room visits for miscarriages are up 54%. Pregnant patients that used to get treatment when suffering heavy bleeding from pregnancy complications are now being sent home. Prior to criminalization, doctors would perform a procedure to evacuate the uterus, ending the pregnancy. Now they have to wait until the patient is near death. Since criminalizing abortion, the rate of pregnancy-related deaths has risen by 56% in Texas. This shouldn't be happening. The Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act requires hospitals that participate in Medicare to provide necessary stabilizing care to patients in an emergency. To enforce this law, the Biden administration sued Idaho to allow patients with pregnancy complications to receive emergency treatment. That case produced harrowing testimony of women spending hours in emergency rooms, bleeding, getting infections, enduring suffering and trauma, being brought to the brink of death before getting emergency care. Despite a Supreme Court decision in favor of the Biden administration, Trump's people said they wouldn't enforce the act and rescinded guidance that people should receive abortion care in a medical emergency, even if state laws restrict it. A couple of important recent developments here. In Idaho, a ruling launched by the Center for Reproductive Rights says a doctor can perform an abortion if a patient risks dying without one, even if that death is neither imminent nor assured. The National Women's Law Center says the ruling doesn't change the law, but it does add to the fear, confusion, and dangerous delays patients and providers have faced. In June of 2025, Texas passed the Life of the Mother Act. It says that a life-threatening medical emergency doesn't need to be imminent to perform the procedures. And discussing abortions with the patient under these conditions is not a criminal act. Republican State Senator Brian Hughes, who wrote the bill and also wrote the law that put the original ban in place, said, "We don't want to have any reason for hesitation." Well, the hesitation hasn't gone away. The law is still vague enough to make care providers wonder under what conditions they'll face 99 years in prison for performing an abortion. The federal government might next follow states who are restricting access to abortion medications. 14 states, including Texas and Louisiana, now ban prescription abortions. 3 states, Idaho, Kansas, and Missouri, are suing the FDA to limit who can use them and who can prescribe them. Note that Missouri voters actually voted to expand access through a constitutional amendment in 2024, but what do Missouri Republicans care about voters' wishes anyway? Like, who the hell are they? If that lawsuit doesn't severely limit prescription abortions, which account for around 60% of all abortions now, Republicans and their allies are salivating at the potential of the Comstock Act. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, amongst others, said the 19th century law could be invoked to restrict the mailing of abortion-related medication. Some legal experts agree. If the Trump administration decided to first reinterpret, then enforce the act, drug manufacturers and distributors couldn't ship the pills at all, anywhere in the country. And it might also restrict the transportation of abortion-related equipment. But the biggest legal question facing America will likely be the personhood of embryos and fetuses. Don't be surprised to see a case in front of the Supreme Court that seeks to give embryos and fetuses the same protections that are guaranteed to people by the 14th Amendment. While the Supreme Court majority that undid the right to abortion in Dobbs didn't explicitly agree with personhood arguments, they certainly used language that aligned with it. In their majority opinion, they described abortion as the taking of a human life and referred to life in the womb as an unborn human being. It's important to remember that the anti-abortion movement has been working toward this goal for decades, setting up legislative wins and legal precedences that played out with Dobbs. The more statutes on everything from wrongful death to inheritance that recognize fetal rights, the more constitutional law could be painted as an outlier. Every judicial decision, like the one in Alabama saying embryos have the same rights as people, it moves the US closer to a broader banning of all abortions. So to sum up, a religious group believes that the destruction of embryos and fetuses is an affront to their God. Because of that, not only should they avoid medical care that would destroy their embryo or fetus, everyone should. And this is the broader point. It is not just about when people should be able to access certain kinds of reproductive care. This is not about 14 weeks or 20 weeks. Every time we have a debate about when to cut off access to abortion, we're having the debate on their false premise, that the state has the authority to trample basic human bodily control to enforce one religion's beliefs. So this isn't just a fight for access to abortion. This is a fight for a democracy and a government that doesn't torture, maim, and kill its citizens to placate a religious sect. I'll see you in the comments.